Happy New Year, Marie.
Happy New Year, Jodi. How's it going?
Oh, it's so cold. How's it going for you?
Yes, same. Absolutely freezing. Yep.
Did you know that 2023 is both a multiple of 7 and the sum of its digits is in fact 7?
No, Jodi, I didn't know that, surprisingly enough.
Oh.
I do know that January has 256 days, though.
Wait, what?
Well, you see, January is the longest month of the year, isn't it? Christmas is over, you've got no money, and it just seems to go on and on and on.
Oh, yeah, it does.
It's your own time you're wasting. Ramblings from Beyond the Classroom with Marie and Jodi.
So, today's episode is called You Don't Have to Be Mad to Work Here. Now, that's one of those super, super helpful things that people say. When obviously you're not mad if you've got mental health issues. It's a massive problem and it massively trivialises it, doesn't it, Marie?
It certainly does, yes, and we don't intend to do that at all. We've just picked a phrase that we're very used to hearing.
And it's a phrase that just has so many problems. And we should say before we properly get into this podcast, it's a tough one. And we are not trained mental health specialists.
No.
So if any of this hits home or you feel you need someone to talk to, please do reach out to someone like a GP who can help you.
Absolutely, yes. We're all just talking from our own experience and sharing a bit of what we know about mental health in schools. But like Jodi says, we are not experts.
A friend of mine followed the great advice of going to the GP and spoke to the GP, and the GP was incredibly helpful. But they asked if a student GP could join in the conversation and follow the person's case. And I asked my sister about it, and she said it's because it was really important for trainee GPs to learn about stress teachers, and because they're going to see it a lot. I should add that I do have permission from my friend to share this story. We are going to talk about a lot of personal stories here. We have permission from everyone involved to talk about them. But isn't that so sad that it's so important for them to know, because they're just going to see it all the time?
Yeah, because it's so prevalent. Yeah. I remember when my dad once went to the doctors. He was a lecturer.
Yeah.
He went to the doctors because he thought he had diabetes because he was thirsty all the time. And the doctor laughed at him and said, "No, it's stress.
Yeah.
I see it all the time."
And even talking about this, my mouth is going dry because it's
same.
Yeah.
Same. Because it's quite triggering, isn't it? Yeah, it is.
So,
yeah.
I mean, I feel like I know what the answer is, but do you know anyone who's suffered from mental health issues in a classroom?
I do, Jodi. I did, for a start. I mean, I always had mental health difficulties anyway, just to caveat that.
Yes.
Why I thought I could go into teaching, now I think about it, is like beyond me. I don't know why I thought I could do that. But yes, the teaching eventually ended up in me having a complete breakdown. And I had to leave teaching temporarily to get myself back together.
Likewise, I suffered, and I don't really want to get into all the details because it is still quite raw for me, but I really suffered. And actually, I think when I start to think about it, I actually don't know that many people who haven't suffered mental health issues as a consequence in the classroom. And those that I do, they're few and far between. It's just such a breeding ground, isn't it?
It is a breeding ground, and I'm not really sure exactly why that is. Perhaps it's the combination of the people who are teachers have a vocation and they're very passionate about what they do. And then there's that conflict of not being able to get through everything or not being able to do things to the standard that you think they should be done.
Yes.
Because there just isn't time. So I think that conflict may have a bearing on mental health. And obviously you've got the scrutiny regime, which, it's really difficult to work under that. I mean, I've heard some horror stories of people having their books checked weekly
Oh,
to make sure they're marked. That never happened to me, I must say that. But just things like that, I think you're under constant pressure. It never, ever stops, does it? You can't go home at night and go, well, that's it, I'm finished. Ever.
exactly. There's always more work to do.
Yeah.
And I think it's not just the teachers, we're talking about teachers, and obviously we are teachers, we could talk about that from experience. But there's also the element of the students as well.
Yeah.
And I mean, I left school 12 years ago, but the pressure that I felt at school from the teachers and the kind of inadequacy that I felt, everybody in this environment has got so much pressure on them.
I am a strong believer in, if you can have your staff feeling psychologically safe, relaxed and happy doing their job, that will automatically transfer onto the pupils, and it will make their lives so much easier. So what, Jodi, as a teacher, were the things you did to try and protect your mental health?
I set myself really clear boundaries.
Mm.
And full disclosure, they weren't very healthy boundaries. So, for example, I would never work on a Saturday. Saturday was my day off.
Yeah.
Now, that's not very healthy because it meant that I worked Sunday.
Yeah.
I would either stay late on a Friday to finish my work and not work Sunday, or I'd work Sunday to prepare for the start of the week. That was my trade-off. So normally I'd leave early on a Friday. As soon as the bell went, I'd be out the door because I liked having that early finish.
Yeah.
I tried to only bring work home that I could do in front of the TV.
Yeah.
Which normally meant planning for me because marking needed my full attention. Sometimes I broke that by taking home marking exams and stuff. That was kind of the main things for me. The other thing that I kind of did is I stopped drinking when I was a teacher because I found that had a massive effect on my mental health. And, I'd enjoy going out and getting drunk with my friends and having a party. And I don't want to imply that I had a drinking problem at all. But I couldn't cope with the impact that it had on me. And I always felt if I had a big weekend, that would make me feel much worse the following week, even if I wasn't hungover. So not completely, but I massively cut down on my drinking and would only save it for special occasions.
So you had to make sure you were in tip-top condition for the week ahead.
And I ate a lot of chocolate. That was my main thing.
Yeah,
what about you, Marie?
Well, I was the same. I set boundaries, but my boundaries were a little bit firmer than yours. I decided I wasn't going to work at weekends at all, especially once I'd had children.
Yeah.
So I didn't mind working a long day during the week, and I would do the same as you. I would stay behind on a Friday and make sure everything was ready for Monday.
Yeah.
So that meant, though, that during the week, I was up every night till midnight, because I was doing a bit of work, I was cooking, looking after children, etc. And then I was getting up at 5:30 to go into school and do it all again. And now I look back on that and think, how on earth did I sustain that for as long as I did?
Yeah. And it is just... It's not just the long hours, because I do long hours now. So I work full time. I also have a podcast, and I also tutor for 6 hours a week.
Yeah.
But I enjoy it because I finish my job and I'm done. I don't think about my job when I'm not at work. I love doing everything that I've done, and I don't really think about tutoring except for when I'm tutoring. Sometimes I'll come across something during the day and I'm like, oh, that'll work really well for so-and-so. But I'm not staying up at night worrying about it at all.
No.
And that's the difference. It's not actually the number of hours, because probably comparably I'm doing similar, but I'm only doing my hours. I'm not then losing sleep about it.
Yeah, that actually, funnily enough, there was a recent survey on mental health in teachers, and mental health had got worse after the pandemic was one of the findings. And the other finding was that I think it was 70% of teachers reported having had a sleepless night, worrying about something to do with work.
Absolutely.
And sleep is so important.
And it was the being ill as well. So I was off work ill last week, and I took 4 days off. I came back and I had about 30 emails to sift through. But other than that, it was exactly how I'd left it. You know, a couple of things had to be moved around, a couple of meetings were cancelled, but that's about it. But there wasn't anything for me to kind of pick up on. There was no consequence of the fact that I'd been ill. Whereas when you used to come back from even one day off at teaching, you'd have this kind of almost passive, not intentionally passive aggressive, but a passive aggressive pile of cover work on your
stuff to do.
desk that you had to sift through. Which leads us to one of our first anecdotes. So we're asking you to email into our mailbag if you'd like to comment on anything we're talking about. So we've got some lovely anecdotes to talk about today. So Marie, would you like to read this first one out, or would you like me to?
I will. I'll read this one. Okay, so this says, during my last year of teaching, I was signed off work by a doctor because of stress. My mental health was very low, and one of the things that contributed to it all was the knowledge that my colleagues were also suffering, and by being off work, I was contributing to their stress too. The guilt was awful. Mental health in teaching feels a bit like a house of cards. As soon as one person goes down, the rest are affected too. Which is a really good point.
It really hits home.
Yeah. There's no escaping that guilt.
No.
Of when you can't take it anymore and you are off sick. And all your colleagues, they will rally round and they will help as much as they can, but you can't help but think you've just added more pressure to their work day.
And I still feel the guilt from a job that I left multiple years ago, because how hard it is for everyone, and everyone is living on the edge. And if you break, everyone else might.
Yeah,
and it's
that's
just,
right.
And it's just not how jobs should be. It's not how your life should be. And there aren't that many jobs that are like this. And I think, I
think there are jobs where there is stress inbuilt.
Yeah.
Like if you are in the army, if you're a paramedic, that kind of job. But I read an interesting article the other day that was basically saying, since when did we accept that teaching will damage your mental health?
Yes.
Why are we just accepting that? Because it doesn't have to be like that. It could be different.
And the friends that I have that are the most understanding of it are nurses, because they have that same, but the difference is they're saving lives and we're teaching maths. It doesn't take a genius to work out which of those is more important.
It doesn't equate, does it? Like, you would expect those jobs to have a certain level of stress with them. But teaching doesn't have to have this level of, what's the word I'm looking for? It's like you on the edge of a cliff all the time. There's no need for it. There isn't.
Well, here we are again, a new year and a new series.
Yep, and I have a good feeling about 2023.
Are you the kind of person that makes New Year resolutions?
Oh, always. But what I do is I celebrate lots of different New Years throughout the year. So I get to Chinese New Year, realise I've not kept my resolutions, so I remake them.
Ooh, I like that.
Yes. So that's the key, Jodi. Celebrate the New Year throughout the year.
Yeah, that seems like a good idea.
Yeah, I did, like every year, think I'm going to eat really, really well, no crisps, no chocolate.
Sounds miserable.
Yeah, but I think we should do an episode on it, actually.
Ooh, chocolate. Can we get Penny to send us some?
Well, that's a great idea, Jodi, except my stuff doesn't arrive, does it, if you remember?
No, but we should do an episode on the teacher diet.
Indeed, like what you end up eating when you're in a rush and what we should actually be eating.
Should we get people to write in about it?
I think so, yeah. So if you've any ideas, stories, tips about how to eat well...
or not so well.
As a teacher, we'd love to hear them.
Our email address is beyondmailbag@twinkle.co.uk, and your email can be anonymised if you want us to.
And don't forget, as ever, we don't spell twinkle correctly. There's no E on the end.
English teachers, eh? Right, we have got an amazing guest today. I absolutely love this person to pieces. She's such a good laugh, and we once played a board game where she tried to kill me, and I love her anyway. She did lie about it, and I've still not forgiven her. This is Sadie. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hello. Thank you for that introduction. I'd actually forgotten about that board game, but obviously you hadn't, Jodi.
I'll never forget.
So fresh in your memory. But yeah, no. So my name's Sadie. My subject is relationships and sex education, or RSE, and so I've worked at Beyond for almost 2 years. Yeah, writing RSE resources, and also I teach it as well. And on the side of that, so I volunteer actually at one of the branches of Mind, which is a mental health charity. So I'm very much kind of into talking about this and discussing this particular topic.
And I think that is one of the best things you can do for your mental health, is talk about it. It's the best thing you can do, because you find other people who are going through similar stuff, and that's, at least you're kind of miserable together.
Yeah, you're never on your own.
No.
You might feel on your own with mental health difficulties, but you're actually not. So, Sadie, do you think schools are a natural breeding ground for mental health issues?
Yeah, I mean, I would say so. I think it's really interesting what you've already discussed about kind of certain workplaces being natural breeding grounds for mental health. Because I absolutely think that there's a lot of kind of high pressure environments that you can work in, and that can be really stressful. But it doesn't feel like teaching should be in with, like you said, doctors, paramedics, or even, when you think about like really high pressure banking jobs, or kind of high managerial roles, especially when you consider kind of the pay differences between the latter and teaching. But I think it absolutely is, and I think it's partly what you mentioned before about kind of the passion that comes with it. I think most teachers come into it thinking, oh, it's really important for me to get the kids through these exams, or get them kind of interested in the subject, or kind of really make sure that I'm doing my job properly. And so that kind of I guess personal expectation that you put on yourself, combined with the expectation that actually a lot of the schools and the public and the parents and the students are putting on teachers, I think all that combined means that it's really easy for it to be a natural breeding ground for a lot of difficulties around mental health. And I thought it was really interesting about you were saying kind of doctors being trained to kind of see the signs, or maybe recognize that it's quite prominent in teachers, but it almost feels like that's not really talked about elsewhere. I was quite surprised that that's accepted in the medical profession, but it doesn't feel like we're in teaching professions we're like, oh that's completely it's almost unspoken, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does make sense. And sometimes there's a bit of this attitude of if you can't stand the heat, get out of the kitchen type of thing, which doesn't help anybody at all. But I think there is some of that still going on in schools. It's a hard job, get on with it, that kind of thing.
And I think
absolutely. And sorry, you go.
I found kind of I tended to be the youngest in the department. I felt like I couldn't talk to the people who are much older than me, because they had been in the career for so long that they probably didn't get it. And maybe that's completely wrong, and I was completely unfair, but that is how I felt. And I tried to talk, I couldn't find support in other teachers and people. In my last job, I remember someone saying, oh, you lasted longer than the last person. By this time, she was crying in the toilets. And I was like, I'm not a crier, but I can see why.
Absolutely.
It's such an unhealthy.
I think as well. So I mean, when you think about how much of the we need a lot of teachers in this country, a lot of teachers in the world. It has to be a lot of the population. So I think for it to be a profession that only fits a very specific and like personality type doesn't really make any sense. It shouldn't be that only people who really can take all of that, they're the only people who can be in teaching. And also it doesn't mean that anyone who can't hack that is weak. It's just, I think that's probably a lot of us really can't take that kind of pressure, and really our bodies shouldn't be able to take that kind of pressure a lot of the time.
What do you think schools can do about it then? Kind of, is it the school's responsibility? Is it government's responsibility? Is it the individual's responsibility?
I think what's really interesting is that obviously in this country and the rest of the world, we need a lot of teachers, and I don't think you can expect all teachers to be that certain personality type that can really cope amazingly with that really, really high level of pressure. Nor do I think that anyone who can't cope with that level of pressure is weak or anything like that. And I think it's actually really normal to not be able to cope with it, and a lot of the time when we can't, that's our body saying, don't push it further.
Absolutely. So what do you think schools could do, Sadie, or is it up to schools to do things?
I mean, I think from a school point of view, I think it's trying to respect, I suppose, those boundaries that I think you guys were talking about earlier. I mean, from a personal point of view, I think the boundaries you were kind of talking about were really important. And what it is really important for teachers to do as well is set boundaries that are realistic for them. So you were kind of both describing how, I know, Jodi, you were saying about, not working on a Saturday. Marie, you were going the other way and saying, trying not to work on weekends at all. And I think actually it's a good idea to set boundaries that are actually achievable to your role. If you are in a role and you know that actually if you don't work at this point, then you might not get that work done. And while ideally you don't want to have to work outside of those hours, I think you have got to be realistic with yourself and go, okay, well, my role requires this and I don't actually mind doing this, so I can kind of tweak those boundaries depending on what that is. And some people won't want to work at all on weekends, and some people will prefer to work a little bit into the evenings. And I think it's just figuring out what works best for you. And I actually think schools need to be able to adapt to that. I think that's really important.
I remember at one of the schools I taught at, they had a 7 to 7 rule. So you weren't allowed to send emails after 7 o'clock at night or before 7 o'clock in the morning, which on paper is a really, really good theory. But it kind of had two impacts. First of all, people would send you an email at 6 o'clock at night, and there's almost an expectation that you would read it. So it kind of led to this 12-hour working. And then the other thing is, one of my colleagues there had a young child, so would leave school at 3 o'clock, go pick up the child from nursery, spend the early evening playing with her. She'd go to bed at 8, and then she'd do her work, which worked for her in her situation because she got to spend time with her kid.
Absolutely,
But then couldn't send any emails because of the 7 to 7 rule. So it was kind of almost, it had good intentions, but it was almost not fit for purpose and not flexible enough for the individuals.
I mean, I think what in that case, what might have been, I suppose, more useful is maybe something like saying, we don't want you to work outside of these hours, because you're not contracted to. However, if these work better for you, then do that, but don't expect someone to reply. Do you know what I mean? So if you need to send an email outside of these working hours, fine, that's what you're doing, but don't necessarily expect someone to reply. And I think I know I definitely have that in our workplace at the moment of, I might kind of wake up really early and go, actually, I'm just going to start my work now because we're kind of lucky enough to have that flexibility. But I'm not going to be online at 6 in the morning and think that I'm going to get pings back and people replying and be able to get certain things ticked off that I need other people's help with. It's not. I don't expect that, and I don't think that schools should necessarily expect that, or other teachers if you're kind of doing things at different hours. So I
think a lot of it in schools is culture, isn't it? And the culture is often set by SLT, and they can very easily influence the feeling of when you should be working and when you shouldn't be working. And I just felt unless I had my head in a book or I was standing in front of a class, I was thought of as lazy and not working.
Yes. And it's not understanding different people's priorities. We have a brilliant anecdote actually that I'd like to share. So before I got pregnant, I had been off for 6 months before that with stress from the workload and lack of support with people behaviour. Once I had my baby, I knew that my priorities had to change, so I requested to go part-time, hoping this would help to find a balance. This just wasn't the case. I found that I was expected at times to keep up with my full-time colleagues, and whenever marking or planning was split across the department, I was always expected to achieve the same. The other part-time member of staff eventually went off with stress and was replaced with a supply teacher who just didn't pull their weight. I ended up staying late on the days I was meant to finish early and working till late at night doing the planning and marking of a full-time member of staff, my own work and the work of the supply teacher. I raised it with my head of department, who told me that everyone else was going above and beyond. During COVID, I saw the opportunity to get out of teaching and I took it.
Interesting.
It's just so true, isn't it?
Yeah, that.
I
Go on, Sadie.
I always felt like a part-time job was just a full-time job for part-time pay.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think a key thing there from that kind of anecdote is that expectation to go above and beyond. And I think actually that's what you're talking about, Maria, about that culture that's being fostered. Is actually there should be an expectation that you're doing exactly the job that you are asked to do, and you're doing a good job of it. You're doing it well, and it shouldn't be expected of everyone that they're going to go above and beyond. If people do, then they do, but it shouldn't be a base level expectation. And yeah, I think as well it is important to not kind of praise that overworking, which is really easily done, I think, in teaching, maybe often more than other professions. I know kind of speaking to a lot of teachers, there's often this thing about, bragging being who's the last in the car park, or kind of thinking, oh, who's worked hardest for this project, who's spent the most time on the displays, all this sort of stuff. And actually, although it has, I suppose, good intentions, it's a bit of chit chat, whatever, I don't think it fosters that healthy work environment.
It becomes like a badge of honour, doesn't it? Oh, I was up till 2 a.m. doing these papers. And that's just not healthy.
Yeah, completely. And so I think, like you were saying, I think SLT can make a difference there in kind of trying not to reinforce and encourage that.
Yeah.
And by doing meaningful things, because I think, we've all worked in schools where they have mental health day or like something similar to that, and it becomes tokenistic, which actually I found was kind of trivializing any struggles I was having with my mental health. And, it didn't have to be like the stress. It could just be that I was feeling low or I'd had a bad night's sleep or whatever. And then you'd have this mental health day. And I remember at one school, it was a training day that was all about teacher wellbeing, and you weren't allowed to work on it. You had to do something other than work. So you could, one of them was sewing, like we made like a giant patchwork type thing together, or there was a massive game of football, or you could get a massage. And I was like, I don't want to do these things. I want to mark my papers and mark my books, and I want to spend all day doing that and getting on top of my work, because that's actually what's going to help my well-being. And then I can go and sew something I actually want to sew, or play football with my friends, not my colleagues.
Or spend your own time doing things that you want to do.
Exactly. Or have a massage in an actual nice massage parlour, not a sports hall. Like, it just was so misguided. And what I wanted to do was sit and mark, and I had to hide from everyone to be able to do that. And it's just,
that's
not the kind of self-care that we're looking for when we say that
it needs to be more systemic than that, doesn't it? Shall we have the last anecdote from our mailbag?
Yes, I think
because this is an interesting one, I think. I didn't realise how much teaching affected my mental health until I stepped off the treadmill. Even summer holidays weren't really a break. They were just a staging post between academic years. It was only when physical health forced a recalibration that I realised how much the stresses and strains of school life dominated my thinking. And even then, it took nearly a year for my mind to catch up with my body and switch off from it. So that's interesting. Indeed. I mean, I think people maybe who've gone into teaching young and have sort of just, gradually stuff's built up and they've just absorbed it and taken it on board. Maybe they're the ones who are in the position of not even realising.
I definitely thought it was what working life was like, because, I had jobs before I was a teacher, but like I worked in theatre, which was an absolute joy. I worked in a call centre, which,
wasn't.
I mean, you had people yelling at you and stuff, but like, I finished at 4:30.
At the end of the day,
exactly.
And sometimes I used to just call home for the last 20 minutes just to kill some time. Didn't really matter as long as you're on a call. But and it kind of So I just thought this is what life was like when I was in a career. And I happened to start around the same time as my sister started working as GP trainee. So as a comparison, she was just as stressed and overworked as I was. My brother works in academia, so he was stressed and overworked. So everyone, and all my best friends are nurses, so they were stressed and overworked. So everyone that I could kind of use to compare myself to was just as stressed and overworked. So I just thought it was normal until I stopped. And then I was like, oh, wait, you're not supposed to want to cry every morning. That's not normal. And you're not supposed to be constantly counting down to your next holidays. But you're in this kind of echo chamber of other people who just think it's normal.
That's right.
And it's not. It's just not.
It's your own time you're wasting. So why not stick the kettle on, put your feet up and have a cuppa? Ah, bliss.
So Sadie, at the end of each episode, we do a star and a wish. So your star is a tip or a story you enjoyed from this episode, and your wish is something you'd like to be maybe brought into schools to help mental health. So, Jodi, what would your star be?
I think it's that we can have these conversations, and I'm so glad that we can, and that I found somewhere where I can talk about it openly, and that I have friends that support me. And I really, really, if you're listening to this and you're thinking, I wish I had that, please do find someone, talk to someone, because it is just such a weight off your shoulders when you start talking to people who have similar feelings. So I guess my star is that there are places you can talk.
Yes, indeed. Okay, so Sadie, what would your star be from this episode?
Yeah, so I think my star from this episode, I've said it already, but I think I found it really interesting how Jodi was saying that kind of doctors are trained on this kind of thing. And I think since mental health has become kind of a hot topic, I mean, it's always been around, but it's become a hot topic in the last 5 or 10 years or so. And I think the idea that we're able to kind of bring that into specific areas and specific professions and really focus on why a certain profession might mean that, you know, mental health will be affected, and how we can work specifically with that to hopefully make things change. So I guess it's really, my star would be really kind of being able to hone in on mental health when it comes to the teaching profession.
Nice.
What would your star be, Marie?
My star would be, for everyone who's suffering from mental health issues, if you can take anything from this programme, take it that you are not alone. Because we had mailbag, we had our own personal experiences. You are not on your own. That would be my thing that I'd like people to take from this episode.
Yeah. Which was going to be my wish. My wish was going to be that everybody knew that other people are out there, and you will be able to find the support.
Yeah.
You just have to look for it and listen to your body. You know, if you're listening to this and you're thinking, actually, I'm not sleeping well, or actually my digestive system was one of the first things that was a flag for me. You know, I had really bad stomach ache and I suddenly became lactose intolerant. Like, if you're these things, even just a tiny bit, stop and reflect and think about whether this is right for you.
And is there anything you can do to alleviate it? My wish is very simple. I wish that Ofsted, when they came in, inspected SLT, and just SLT. They could wander around the school and get a feel for the school, but just SLT. And that the abiding principle of Ofsted would be to make sure SLT is making the teacher's job as easy as possible.
Yes.
And I think if that paradigm changed, that would create a massive change across schools, and it wouldn't be that difficult to do. It wouldn't cost anything.
Can I change my wish, actually?
Go on.
I wish for just... mental health is, as Sadie said, being talked about so much more in recent history. But for that to change on a sort of national level, and for governments and people in power to actively make mental health important and to prioritise it, not just in teaching, but in all the other professions that we've kind of compared it to today. The big one that screams to me is nursing. Just do something about it. It's a massive problem. Please, someone fix it.
And that they have the power to do that. What do you think, Sadie? What's your wish?
I think my wish is that we, maybe from this podcast or maybe just in generally, people feel a bit more able to speak out if we start leaning into that culture of bragging about being the last in the car park or staying up till 2 a.m. marking or whatever else. It doesn't have to be mean, but just going, yeah, actually, you don't have to do that. And my brag is that I stayed at home in the evening and had a hot chocolate and watched some Downton Abbey, just one of my favourite TV shows.
Nice.
Top TV show.
Yeah, can we brag about
about looking after yourself,
the enjoyable things, about having a nice time rather than how stressed or how incredibly hard we are overworking ourselves. That is my wish.
That would be amazing. Thank you so much, Sadie.
Thank you so much. And thank you to our audience for joining us. And also like and follow.
Indeed. Yes.
I'll see you next time.
Next time. Bye.
Bye.
This podcast is proudly produced by Beyond. Please bear in mind the views and opinions expressed are those of individuals and may not represent those of Beyond or Twinkle.